question I'd like to ask is, how can we listen to, see, feel and learn from those who are talked about rather than those who are talking in the great climate change debate?
Hi, I'm Wallace Heim. I'm a co-editor of the Ashden Directory with Robert Butler and Kelly Goodman. I also work as an academic, researching and teaching on art and ecology, especially on performance theatre and social practice art. My academic background is in philosophy, but I've also worked as a set designer in theatre. When I was at Lancaster University in 2000, I was one of the co-organisers of Between Nature, which brought together artists and academics working on performance and ecology. And 2 books came out of that, Performing Nature and Nature Performed. I live here in the Lake District in Cumbria in the northwest of England, and it's a very industrial landscape. Sheep farming and hill farming have shaped the surface of the land, and now it's tourism, which is one of the main industries. The other main industry would be the nuclear industry over on the coast with the Irish Sea. And this is an expanding industry as part of the government's plans for coping with peak oil. Okay, the question I've been given from Paul is, how can we listen to, see, feel, and learn from those who are talked about, rather than those who are talking in the great climate change debate? And I think to answer this, first of all, I want to think about how climate change makes this question different from other political situations. I want to think about how listening can be done, and I also want to think about why it's necessary and how this question might change how theatre is made. To start off, I think climate change muddles the orders of peoples and publics that have been made in other contexts, particularly other political contexts. I think it's shown up very complex patterns of connections that cross location, that cross time and culture. So it's not only, I think, those who have been rendered invisible or unheard in any culture, or those who are most vulnerable, or those who are most immediately suffering that need to be listened to. It's possible that one must also listen to those who might be economically and educationally privileged. And I think it's also necessary to learn from various expertises, whether that's the scientific, the institutional, and local knowledge. I think those to whom we really must listen, in the widest sense of listening, are to the other living beings, to the animals and to the others, to the habitats and environments, the elements, the processes, the circulations upon which we depend. And this kind of listening may actually change how we listen. So thinking now about how listening, seeing, feeling, and learning from another can be done, I don't have any short answer to that. I don't think there's one form of listening. Listening to a river is very different from listening to a human adversary. I think one way to start is to stop talking. But this doesn't mean a blank silence. I think listening is fiercely difficult. Oddly enough, I think a good conversation is a good analogy for listening. It's dependent on the relations between those who are together. It depends on being open to being changed by what one has seen or felt. I think it also involves judgment, in being able to discern who's making sense and who's making noise or merely capitalizing on the situation. I think it means sometimes having to give an account of oneself in public, which can be very painful. A good conversation has a life of its own. It's not really in anyone's control. I think the ideal would be to spend time together face to face, but this is not always possible. I think the responsive and critical imagination required for listening at a distance is crucial to develop if it can be. Okay, so I want to think too about why listen? Why is it necessary? And I think the question that Paul raised is really a question about climate justice. It's about how listening and theatre making can be involved in the challenge to redefine and reinvent what it means to be just, and for whom in the face of climate change. And I also think that what is just is not merely a set of rules or decisions, but it's a way of knowing what to do in a situation which is so unprecedented and complex that there's no experience or no principle to show the way. And I think the practice of listening can play a part in developing that capacity to respond to change. But I don't want this focus on listening to overshadow the imperative to speak and to express and to make very provocative theatre. Because I think the question of how to listen has actually engendered new forms of performance making. I think Boal is an example, and even Grotowski. And it could be that these new and necessary forms of listening that are developing in response to climate change will be part of how theatre itself adapts and changes, because it must. So my question follows on a bit from my answer, which is about form and change in theatre. So the forms of theatre and performance are continually changing. They're adapting, evolving in response to ideas and technologies and desires. I think it's important to think about the material effects of productions, but I think it's vital to consider the experience of theatre itself, the heart of its art making, its immediacy, its relations, and how these too might need to change. So my question is, what would you keep from theatre and performance practice, and what needs to change in response to climate instability?